Hello and welcome back to the Elevate Your Running podcast. This is Coach Sarah, and today I'm here with Carrie Jackson. Hey, Carrie, how is it going?
It is going well. I am very excited to be here.
I am so excited that you're here. We started talking months and months and months ago. I want to say it was like the beginning of the year. We have a mutual friend that was connecting us and thought, your expertise on, we're going to be talking about pre-race anxiety solutions today for the everyday athlete. And your expertise around this subject would be a really great podcast episode for the Elevate listeners. And I'm really, really excited that we were able to make this happen as we head into fall race season, which is a
That's
really
right.
big season of running and training and racing. And offline before we hit record, I was just mentioning to you that like over the weekend, I kind of got this like surge of emails from athletes that I'm coaching about like, are you sure we're doing enough? Race day is in X number of weeks. And, I think it's super, super common, but I think today's episode is going to be all about finding those solutions to maybe feelings that are coming up between now and race morning. But before we begin, before we jump in, I'd love for you to give us just a quick rundown on who you are, what you do,
Yeah.
and anything else that you want to add in there.
Yeah. So, Carrie Jackson, and I'm a mental skills coach and a certified performance consultant through the Association for Applied Sports Psychology. So, I've been working in the field of sports psychology for over 20 years and have had the opportunity to work with from recreational, age grouper, masters to elite and professional athletes competing at national and international levels. So, I get to work with many, many different athletes in many, many different sports, but specialize in working with endurance athletes, which is my favorite. Don't tell anybody. And
Mine too.
but I also specialize in working with injured athletes, which is a huge passion of mine. So I have a couple books, one on top of your game, which is mental training, like and a lot of it actually, that first book that I wrote was very much tailored to this topic that we're talking about, where I had just like a string of athletes that had so much performance anxiety going into events that they were starting to contemplate quitting their sports. And these were people that loved their sports. And I was like, no, let's, and they kind of called me to work together as like you're like my last hope. And I was like, okay, let's see what we can do. And so through our work together, they kind of were able to get some tools, and some of them came back to have their best seasons ever. So that I was like, okay, it was heartbreaking to think that people were going to quit their sports when they just needed some tools to deal with the pressure and the anxiety they were feeling. And so I wrote the first book. And then my second book, Rebound, I co-authored with my amazing co-author, Cindy Kuzma, and that's for injured athletes. So I've had the opportunity to work with just so many different athletes, and definitely dealing with pre-race anxiety is in my wheelhouse.
Great, 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 great. I mean, that's a great intro and I'm really excited about our combo because like you mentioned, with those athletes reaching out to you, it's a surreal feeling as an athlete where on one hand you absolutely love the sport,
Mhm.
you're training hard, you might really love the training and you just want to do your best on race day, and then on the other hand, you have this like crippling anxiety, or in some
Yeah.
cases, it's crippling anxiety going into race day. And we want to be able to balance that and find those solutions because I think it's really difficult to kind of balance both of those. And you might think as an athlete that something is wrong with you, when in fact, it's quite normal. It's a quite normal experience, especially because I think it all comes down to caring and we care about what
Yes.
we do.
Exactly, right? Like it lets you know that what you're about to do means something to you and it's important to you. And so then trying to understand the difference between allowing something to be meaningful and then you would feel the impact if you don't accomplish your goal, that is different than putting pressure on yourself to accomplish your goal, which often ends up sabotaging your performance.
Yeah, yeah. And that's a really interesting piece to it. So, I want to jump in and talk about how we can understand what causes it before we talk about solutions. So, what are some of the common sources of race day anxiety for runners? And do they differ between like the beginner runner who's going into maybe their first marathon versus that like seasoned runner who might be going into their seventh, eighth, ninth marathon?
Yes, yeah. So sometimes, so it can be different. A lot of times there's crossover, but like someone that's going into their very first, some of the anxiety might be just the unknowns of like, can I actually do this distance? Is this something that I'm going to be able to accomplish on the day of, or putting pressure on yourself for a specific outcome? So sometimes, just in general, anytime we're taking on something new, the brain is sort of tuned into like, uh-oh, can I do this? Can I handle this? What's in front of me? And for a seasoned athlete, sometimes then the anxiety has to do with, depending on how they're approaching their race day goals, like putting pressure on themselves to get a particular outcome. Or maybe they're, for both groups, like dealing with a little like flare up of an injury that they're concerned about, that they're like, oh my gosh, am I going to be able to do this? But sometimes it's just like leading up to an event, thinking, oh my God, like what you were saying about the people emailing you, like, did I do enough? Like, should I have done more? And like questioning your training. So one of the first things I tell them is like you can't, a couple 3 weeks out, you can't question your training anymore. Like you did everything you could to train the way that you did, and you need to trust your training and let that go, because nothing at this point that you're going to do is going to have an impact on your overall fitness. But there's definitely things that we can do that will help with your mental fitness at this point.
Yeah, and that mental fitness can really take place throughout the course of a training cycle. So I really don't like, when athletes come to me and they seem cool, calm, and collected, and then maybe it's race week where they come to me and all of a sudden the anxiety is just unleashed. And it's like, wait a second,
Yeah,
you
exactly.
were holding this
Like,
in.
why didn't we talk about this sooner? Yeah.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of time that we can work through this, but I think it's finding that balance and making sure that I think it's also okay to understand that like anxiety is part of it, or nerves, race day nerves are part
Yeah.
of the experience, but
Yeah.
it is having this balance of making sure that the excitement is overtaking that anxiety feeling, or those nerves, those butterflies that you kind of have at the
Yeah.
start of the race line. And I think it's I was shaking my head as you were giving that explanation about the beginner marathoner versus the seasoned marathoner or endurance athlete, because how many of us have been on that start line of 26.2 and our longest long run has only been 20 miles, maybe at the most, right? So there's so much unknown there. So, can you kind of explain maybe more of the psychological response to the body that anxiety kind of produces? So, an athlete can be like aware, maybe they don't even know it is anxiety, but maybe
Right.
what the body's kind of signaling to them that does mean anxiety.
Yeah. So sometimes, some of the symptoms are like a lot of different people will experience. And then sometimes there's some that will be very unique to the individual, right? So some athletes will feel those nerves. So basically what's happening is that when you've triggered your fight or flight response, like your body's dumping all these different hormones inside of you to get ready to run or fight for your life, which if you're actually running or fighting for your life, like there's an actual threat of harm to your life, this system is beautifully designed to be able to do that. But when we trigger that in response to an athletic endeavor, it often gets in our way. So you might feel, so some people will shake. Not everybody experiences that. Like some people have sweaty palms, butterflies in their stomach. That's where mine percent, like I will get dragons, not just butterflies. Like I get, like that is where I feel it. Racing heart. Sometimes one that people don't always notice that's important to tune into is either holding your breath or just shallow breathing and just breathing in your chest. And that's an important one to pay attention to, because when you hold your breath or you're just breathing shallow, it sends a signal to your brain that you're in distress. And so that feeds into the anxiety cycle. Some people get really nauseous. Not everybody does, but that's another sort of symptom that some people can feel, or racing thoughts. So it just depends. Like, but kind of tuning into like, oh, how does it present for me? And what are the very first signs that let me know, like, oh, I'm starting to feel a little nervous. Like, what do I need to do to self regulate in this moment instead of letting it get to full blown? Because a lot of times what happens is kind of the twofer with this physiological response that you get that isn't always going to serve you. Then it's our interpretation of those physiological symptoms that contributes more to the feeling of anxiety. So you feel like the butterflies in your stomach and your heart's racing, and you go, I'm nervous. Like I don't, and because those feelings don't feel good, right? So instead, so we interpret it as bad and put it into sort of that category. And then when we do that, we go, oh, I'm feeling anxious, instead of like, that's an easy reframe that is one of my personal tools that I've used over the years and that I use with my athletes, which is like, wait, I'm not nervous, I'm excited. And this is my body getting me ready to go. And so just that flip sometimes is enough to take the intensity away, right? You're still going to feel those symptoms, but it might not be as intense as it was before you gave yourself that reframe.
Yeah, that's a really great explanation and understanding of maybe what you can feel on race day. And for our audience, I hope you're thinking about, maybe the last time you were on the start of a race and how did you show up? What kind of feelings were you feeling in your body and in your mind as you were on that starting line? Now, these responses can also happen in training, correct? Or are they more so likely to happen on race morning?
Many athletes experience more of those feelings in like race morning or versus in training. But you absolutely, there are some athletes that I work with that are also experiencing that in training as well, where maybe like they're trying to hit certain times and they're not hitting them. And so they might start to experience or doing a workout that they think like, I don't know if I'm ready for this. So you can, but oftentimes if you are hitting great numbers in your training and you're performing really consistently and then it's not quite there on race day, that lets you know that, oh, okay, there might be something happening. You might be putting pressure on yourself. And it's really tough with, when you're running longer distance events, what's challenging about it is just the nature of it sort of creates more pressure than other event, right? Like I went to a Valkyries basketball game last night with WNBA team and it's like if you're a basketball player and you don't have a great game, it's like, well, okay, well I get to try again and then, next week. It doesn't work like that when you're training for a marathon distance or longer distances. So because of that, because it's such a long training period and then the one day versus like, okay, I get to try again next weekend. Like if you're a soccer player, a basketball player, there's more pressure on the athlete for the day of. So one of the things that's really important to do is kind of step back and look at the whole picture and make sure that you're gauging your feelings of success on all of that because a lot of things can happen race day that are out of your control that can affect the outcome. But just the fact that you got yourself to the start line healthy and making all of the sacrifices you had to make to do all of the training, there's so many things you did right to get to that place and to make sure that you recognize that too. And of course, we want it to go great on the day of. So you
Yeah.
really want to make sure you're working on your mental training because you don't want to leave that up to chance. Like especially you're putting in hour, like so many resources and sacrifices going into this. Like you deserve to have race day be a celebration and not like filled with dread. So and you don't want to leave that up to chance. So working on the mental training is just as important as the physical training.
Absolutely. It's so, so, so important. And it made me think of two things. One, David Roche, run coach, Boulder, Colorado, he just completed Leadville 100 ultra race for the second time year over year, placing first. So he won the race overall and he set course records not just last year, but he took 14 minutes off his course record from 2024
Huge.
Saturday. It's huge,
Yeah,
right?
that is
The guy is
significant.
like, so inspiring. His YouTube videos, his weekly podcast, it's so good. And he had signed up for Western States and he did a whole docu-series on his build for Western States and when
Mhm.
it came down to it on race day he ended up DNFing right around I think it was like somewhere in the mile 60s something like that. It was in the Forest Hill area. Later it came out that it was his mindset
Mm.
that prohibited him from continuing to run. There's even documents or of a documentary video on YouTube, like a YouTube clip of that day showing him talking to his crew and just what was coming out of his mouth was just so different than the runner and the athlete that we kind of knew from all these other content platforms. So it is really interesting. And he even said, like, after the fact, it was the one point in his training that he didn't
Uh,
train. He trained heat, he trained his gut, he obviously trained his legs and his lungs and the elevation, but he didn't train his mind. And it ultimately ended up getting to him. And the second point I wanted to make is over this spring season, I jumped into quite a few races. And now they're not marathons because what we know for endurance athletes is, when you're going after a really strong half in a really strong marathon, you can't just turn those over and over and over. You can only do them sporadically throughout the year
Mhm.
in a very thoughtful way if you want to stay happy, healthy, and not get injured. Well, I ended up jumping into some 5K and some 10Ks. And I remember telling my team and the team that I coach locally that by the time I got to my last 10K of the season, and this was maybe I think it was my fourth race in like less than 3 months, maybe 8 weeks, I think it was. I felt so cool, calm, and collected at the start line. I felt ready to go. I was kind of like, welp, we'll try again. Like I can just sign up for another one in a few weeks if this
Right.
doesn't go well. Where cut to the very first 10K that I ran, I was nervous as a Nelly. Like I was just standing on the start line. Like I haven't raced this distance in a few years. I really don't know what I'm getting myself into. And so it's just a good story for people to understand that, yes, racing more often, I think, can be helpful. And if you get yourself into a situation like you're marathoning or you're going into ultras and you're not really able to turn over those ultra distances either as maybe as quickly as you want to,
Mhm.
having that strong mindset going into it is really, really, really going to help you. So what would be one of the most, or how can runners kind of distinguish between like the normal pre-race anxiety versus that detrimental going to take you out and get in your own way during the race?
Yes. Yeah. Because there is a tipping point with it, right? Like where stress to a certain point actually helps us to focus and to hone in. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's not necessarily like, so some of my athletes, I never assume they want their pre-race nerves to change. I'll ask them because for some of them, they'll be like, oh no, if I don't feel that at the beginning of the race, that's how I know something's wrong. Right. So it's normal to feel this way, like in anticipation of this event that you're about to take on. Like it's a normal body response and psychological response. When you know, like, ooh, I think now we're tipping into something more detrimental, is oftentimes that anticipatory anxiety, as soon as the race starts, kind of flushes out, like it goes away. And it's almost like you're completing a stress cycle by getting into physical activity. Whereas if it continues throughout your race, then yep, that was like the amount that I'm feeling is too much. So, and really, to as much as we can, we want to really pay attention to that pre-race time because you're burning matches, right? Like when you're feeling that kind of those butterflies and feeling nervous and feeling anxious, it takes energy. It consumes quite a bit of energy. And so you don't want to burn that freaking out before the race. You want to use all that energy during the race. So really thinking about like, ooh, what do I need to do, not just to physically warm up, but mentally get into the headspace that works the best for me going in is really important for that piece also for energy management.
Oh, yeah, that's a great suggestion. And I think like keeping yourself occupied during like the warm up too, I think would be really helpful. Cause as someone who warms up alone before races, like sometimes that's when my mind is just going, 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 going,
Yeah.
going. But what would you say would be like we're all human. So we all have these emotions, right? And we all can feel this way. But is there a certain type of runner that might feel more anxious than another type of runner?
Yeah, I think one of the things that often will produce more anxiety than for some runners than others is actually how you are approaching your race goals. So if you're
Mm.
an athlete that has only set outcome goals for your race, right? So you're only looking at placing or time and you're just focused on the outcome goal and have not set up any process goals, meaning like what are the things that I need to tune into during the race and where your focus needs to be on actually what you're doing. So if you only have outcome goals, oftentimes there might be more anxiety around like, am I going to accomplish my goal? Because what happens is like you're in the middle of the race and then you start to, maybe your dad is telling you like, oh, I'm not on track to accomplish my goal. Then you're up in your head and freaking out about like feeling like you're seeing your race slip away.
Mhm.
Versus if you're tuned into the process goals, you're more likely to make the adjustments that you need in order to continue and and potentially still accomplish your goal or get close to accomplishing your goal. So the process goals are so critical for keeping you in the present moment and keeping you focused on things that are in your control. How you're setting your race day goals is a big difference with whether you're feeling anxious or not about the day of. The other thing I would say is also, if you that creates more pressure and anxiety for athletes, is if you are tying your self-worth and
Mm.
your value to the event. If you are putting pressure on yourself and feeling guilty, or feeling like putting pressure on to get, like, I have to do well, or I have to finish this race because of the impact it had on my family and all of the time I took away. So that, like, if there's guilt in there, or if there's any kind of self-worth tied up in your event and your result, you're going to feel more pressure than versus someone that goes in, that goes, let's see what I've got today. Like, and kind of goes in with it, like, let's celebrate all of my months of training and have an amazing time out here and feel grateful for how lucky I am to get to race today. Right. So those are two kind of really big things that I see that make a significant difference.
Yeah, and I feel like in my own racing experience and with athletes that I've coached too, when they've had that mindset on the start line and even during the race of like, I'm just so happy to be here. I'm grateful. Maybe there's family and friends along the course. You're given high fives. That athlete tends to relax and then they're able to execute what they want to execute, which is really phenomenal. In terms of the process versus outcome goal, is it okay for an athlete to have both? And when are those goals kind of established? Should they be established at the beginning of a training cycle, or can they start
Yeah.
to manifest and be a bit more solidified halfway through the cycle or a month out?
Yeah, that's a great question. So absolutely you want to have both, right? So actually, there's three different goals you want. You want to have process, performance, and outcome goals. So the
Mhm.
performance goals are like, what are the maybe the milestones you need to hit along the way, right? So the process goals is like, what are the actions I need to take in order to, like, work towards the outcome goal? And then the performance goals are like, what are some of the things I might want to hit along the way? And then you have the outcome goal, which is kind of like the big long-term goal. And you absolutely want to set all three types of goals. So it's okay to have outcome goals. It's if you only have outcome goals where you might get into trouble. So it's good to have all three. And in terms of when you do that, it's okay to, I mean, already when you sign up for the event, you've started the goal setting process, right? Like, so, but to your point, like, you might want to be fluid with it. So adjusting your goals is a very normal part of the goal setting process that really athletes need to embrace, because sometimes we set a goal for ourselves and at that moment we feel like that's a realistic goal. And then we get into the training cycle and realize, oh, you know what? I thought that was something I was going to be able to do, but now that I'm here, I think I might need to adjust my goal. And in either direction, right? Or it could be like, you had a setback with a minor injury and you have to adjust your training plan. Something happened in life where life pulled you in, like with, family matters, or, so there's all kinds of things that, like, it's so critical to be able to give yourself give yourself permission to adjust your goal, because you don't exist in a vacuum, because you have this other full life that is also part of
Mhm.
what's happening. And so you are going to have to adjust sometimes, or you might, have a great, I have finally put together an amazing training cycle and, like, everything's going great. And, like, maybe I could adjust my goal the other way.
Yeah.
So you can do it early on, but you just want to be ready to adjust as needed.
I love that. And it's such a good reminder that we can adjust our goals. And it's not just we set this at the beginning of our 12, 16-week cycle, and it's either make or break. This is it.
Hmm.
And we have the ability to adjust. How often do you suggest an athlete kind of checks in with themselves when they are deciding, okay, I've set this goal, we're 4 weeks in, do I need to adjust it or can I kind of stay the course?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I do, like, I'll do a formal goal setting process with my endurance athletes. And on there, one of the things that we do is schedule check-in times. Like,
Mhm.
okay, so when am I going to check in my goal, to normalize that process of, like, okay, what's working, what's not working, what do we need to adjust? And so doing that, like, depending on what you're like, scheduling in at least two different times to, like, really sit down and evaluate what's working, what's not working in a non-judgmental way, right? Because one of the things that happens if you have not given yourself permission to adjust the goals and you set that initial goal and you come to your check-in period and you feel like, oh, I'm not even close to my goal, it feels like, oh, I've already failed. Like I might as well just give up now. Like, no, you didn't fail. Your original assessment didn't work. So let's regroup and see what's working and what's not working and go from there.
Yeah, I think that's great. Do you ever have, yeah, like an athlete who, maybe they're 8 weeks out from their goal race and they're like, this isn't coming together. I just want to quit. Like, what are kind of your recommendations for that athlete as they're like, nope, the goal isn't happening. I'm not going to do it.
Yeah. So sometimes what we think is a lack of motivation is actually a lack of confidence. So
Mm.
that's the first thing we want, I would assess in that moment is like, okay, let's see what's happening here. Is this like motivation, meaning like, are you experiencing some burnout? And that might be stemming from other areas of life too. Like, are you feeling overwhelmed? Are you feeling burnout? Are you feeling like, I signed up for a goal that I didn't even want to sign up for in the first place, right? So is it a motivational issue or are you feeling this way because you're putting pressure on yourself for a specific outcome and you feel like you're not going to meet the original goal that you set, or you're starting to feel like not confident in your ability to accomplish this goal that's in front of you. So you kind of have to assess which one it is if you get to that point and then decide, okay, do I need to adjust my goal, or did I set a goal that is just I'm not connecting with now, and maybe I need to rethink whether or not I want to do it at all.
Yeah, yeah. And it's such a normal process, I think, or a normal feeling to come up. And I think social media doesn't do a great job of highlighting that with athletes of like, this is my goal, I'm going to work hard, and then I get that goal.
Yeah.
But for someone who's on the other side of it, and I work with dozens of athletes, and you're on the other side of it, you're kind of on the back side of we get to see behind the curtains
Yes.
and what's actually going on. Is that I think that more times than not, athletes are changing their races, their goals, whether that's process goals, performance goals, outcome goals, the way that they want to get to that Boston qualifying marathon or the way that they get to running their first marathon. And one of the things that I love so much about running is that everyone's journey is going to look different to ultimately the same destination. You ultimately get to your North Star, and that's such a great place to be. I would love to dive in now to like solutions for these athletes who are going through moments of feeling anxiety during training and on race day. Like, when does that mental strength training begin and what does it look like?
Yeah. So ideally, you want to start that process like preseason or early in your training of building up the skills that you need. Because we don't think about things like focus or resilience, dealing with setbacks, confidence. We don't always think of those as skills, but they are
Yeah.
skills, which means if you want to be able to use them in a high pressure situation on race day, you have to have done the training, right? Just like you do your physical training to be prepared for the day of so that you can take on that distance on that day. You have to do the mental training too if you want to be able to know how to recognize when something's off and then know what to do in that moment to self regulate, to kind of bring yourself back. So there's some foundational skills that you want to be working on early in that process. And then as it gets closer, like you can fine tune with some really specific tools for being prepared for race day. So the foundational tools might be around like your like self-belief and your internal dialogue and your ability to visualize yourself accomplishing your goal. Breathing, because that's a huge self-regulating tool for managing race day nerves. So really working on like building the foundation with some of those and then getting into some fine tuning around like creating your pre-race plan, creating your plan for critical moments during the race, like getting into real specific mental training for the day of.
Yeah. And what would that look like in terms of like maybe it's the season before the season where an athlete's saying, hey, I'm going to work on building a really strong base and then I'm going into marathon training. And while I'm in this base building phase and I'm running miles and strides and more miles,
Yes.
I'm going to work on these foundational skills of focus and resiliency and positive self talk. How often should they be working on that? Should it be during their training runs? Should it be before or after? Or what does that kind of look like?
Yeah, so it depends on, like if I have a client that I'm working with that has come to me, like part of my decision-making process with that is has to do with my assessment of like, okay, well, what are some of the things that are getting in this athlete's way and what are the things we could do in order to help you accomplish your goal? So some of that is like when I'm working with an athlete is very tailored to that specific athlete. But if you're like, okay, I'm really ready to like kind of work on some mental training and mindset training, you might just pick like you could pick a specific workout um, of the week where you're going to include mindset as part of the workout, right? So you might be looking at if you're running intervals, like, oh, I'm going to practice um, my 1% rule. So, like, if you're someone that feels like I keep getting to the end of a race and I still have some left in the tank, so I'm not pushing myself as hard as I think I am, then we might practice the 1% rule, which is can I push myself 1% more than the endpoint that is like prescribed at that time, right? So can I run like 2 seconds past what my brain wants to stop? Or, so coming up with ways to kind of train that. So that might be something that you're doing early on, and you might pick a specific workout to do, or you might try like some deliberate practice, which is so this number gets thrown out all the time. Like you need 10,000 hours in order to
Yeah.
master something, right? Like
Yeah.
it's a little more complex than that, like the original research on this. So the whole idea with the 10,000 hours comes from research around this idea of deliberate practice, which means, am I really using each practice in order to build and in an intentional and deliberate way? So you might tap into that by early on in your training each week identifying like what is my intention for this week, what's the most important thing for me to get out of this week of training, what are my goals. So you're going in very deliberately with how am I using this practice in order to build on it, both physically and mentally, versus just like checking it off the to-do list, which is often the approach, right? Because we're so busy and it's just like, oh my God, I have to do this today, like check, versus like, this is my intention. And then reflecting at the end of the week of like, okay, so how do I feel like it went? What were the things that went well? So getting intentional with deliberate practice is another thing you can do early on. Or it might be like, I'm going to start practicing my athlete affirmations before I go into training and kind of crafting what your affirmations are and then saying that to yourself. There's so many different, or you could use, or it might be visualization of like, oh, I'm going to play with visualization during my training today and imagine what it's like to be on the course that I'm going to be running. And so there's just so many different things that you could do to kind of bring mental training into the mix in that in those phases, right? And kind of think about it like periodization training, where it's there's times where you might be working more on your mental training and times where like you're taking a break from it, just like you are with your physical training.
Yeah. And what we know to be true is that, mental strength is a tool. It can be trained and you can also lose it if you're not
Yes.
using it.
Yep. Unfortunately.
Unfortunately, yeah. Um, I have an athlete right now where we're doing more daily intentional work of she's reflecting before and after her runs on what's working, what's not working, and for her that is proving itself to be such a big confidence booster for her as she
Hmm.
starts to see I'm stacking a lot of greens is what we're calling, like, I feel great, or I'm feeling like confident, or I'm feeling ready. And being able to look back on all those runs to kind of see the process, to kind of see the pattern and to see the ebb and flow of maybe when it's not a green and maybe when it's a yellow or a red, and how you can tie that back to life. And if there's stressful things going on in life, or maybe it's a stressful workout, or something else is popping up, but it is a really cool way to kind of like look back to kind of see
Yeah.
what's been going on. So that daily check-in, although a lot of work, really is, I think, a great way. Obviously, at the end of the week, also another great way. Do you have a preference on like if it's a daily or weekly, or does it
Yeah.
really not matter?
That's a great question. Oftentimes, the preference falls to what is more realistic for the athlete. Like if
Mhm.
they could do it daily, there's some, it's amazing because to your point, like look back and see the trends and understand like, oh, wow, it's during this phase of my training that I have more yellows. Like what's going on there and what can I do? So it's really valuable information. But if you're someone that's like, that feels so overwhelming. Like if you're listening to this conversation right now and you're like, "Oh my God, how am I supposed to do all this too?" On top of if a week feels more realistic, then just do that and it's fine. But even the daily, it doesn't have to be huge. It could be like, before you're training, like, how do I want to show up for training today? And then at the end saying, what's one thing that went well and one thing I need to work on. And that's it.
Mhm.
Like, so sometimes we work it up into something huge in our minds of like, oh my God, this is going to take so long. I can't do this. Kind of like we do with the dishes sometimes, right? Where you're like, I don't have time for that. When really, if you just did it, it would be 5 minutes. So, but if
I
that
know.
holds you back, the week of like, uh, if I do it daily, you're not going to do it at all, then figure out a better timeline that works for you. Maybe it's like, okay, I'm going to do it on Wednesdays and Sundays, or I'm just going to do it Sundays, and that's fine.
Yeah. And, there is this concept of, sandwiching your runs with, a proper warm up, you get the run in, and then you have a proper cool down, which might be
Yes.
some static stretching, maybe a little bit of strength work. But why not add in just 1 or 2 minutes of reflection, whether that is daily, which I know can be overwhelming. It's like sometimes as a coach, it's like hard to just get comments back from the athlete, let alone they are, I think, I guess with comments come reflection of how the workout went,
Hmm.
or I get comments and I'm like, oh, this has nothing to do with actually the workout itself. It has everything to do with what was going on around that athlete. And having that reflection time really is pivotal. And something that worked really well for me a few years ago when I was in a marathon training build is I was training a lot of solo miles and I was just out there kind of cruising along. And so anytime, especially in a long run workout, 20 miles with some quality work, every time I hit not necessarily like an outcome time, but I was kind of like in that window of where I wanted to be for marathon pace, I would say out loud, you're proving yourself right. You're proving yourself right. And that builds momentum. How important is momentum when it comes to building the mindset when we're in training, and how important is it?
Yeah, it's definitely can play a significant factor. One of the ways I like to think about it is like this activity that I'll do with some of my athletes is a stoplight where we're looking at like your green light is like everything is amazing and I'm on fire and everything I want to do, I'm able to execute and I feel strong and I feel confident. And red light is like, I think I'm going to quit. Like, why did I even sign up for this? Red, like nothing's going right kind of thing. And what happens is that oftentimes athletes think that they've gone straight from their green light to their red light when really there's this whole yellow light. So although like, doing things to create that momentum can serve you really, really well, there will be times when you start to dip into your yellow light and you want to know like, what is the first thing that lets me know I'm out of my green light so that you can address it there in order to continue with that momentum. So to not panic when it feels like the momentum is shifting and know what do I need to do to self-regulate in order to kind of bring it back and catching it because in the yellow light because you can bring it back from the red but it's much easier to catch it in the yellow light and kind of move it back into the green and keep that momentum going. But it's like it's very helpful to have that momentum and it works really well. But it's also really important to train your resilience because every endurance athlete will tell you like race day doesn't go always go as planned. So if you
Right.
can really make sure you're accepting that whatever happens on race day, that is what I am meant to deal with this day. Like that this is meant to be part of my race. And what do I need to do to address what's happening in the moment and have the opportunity to flex the resilience muscle because there's more often there's races where we had to make adjustments and there's things that we had to address versus like everything was perfect, right?
Mhm.
Like that doesn't happen as often as this other one. So doing what you can to know how to create that momentum and also knowing if things like having your mental training there so that you know if things don't go as planned, I know what to do about it. I can handle it.
Yeah, what are your tips when it comes to building resilience and that flexibility and adaptation when you are like in, let's say, a long tempo run or a long run workout? Because that, I think those two workouts
Yeah.
are great examples of race day, right? Like
Yes,
you're in
yes,
it. And
definitely.
of course, in training, you can stop. I guess in a race, you can also stop. But like, how does an athlete flow through that and make it a win for them?
A big part of it is accepting what's happening in the moment.
Yeah.
So oftentimes we fight against something because we don't
Yeah.
want it to be happening. And that takes focus away from what you can do and what's in your control and starts to hijack you into emotions that aren't going to serve you. So one of the things that we play with is yes and. So I call it yes and, which is basically like what they use in improv. So if you've ever done improv or taken improv classes, like there's this rule where, so you and another person are up on the stage and you're given like maybe a location and an object or something, and then you create a scene. And you and your partner have to do a scene on the spot without any like prep at all. And so one of the rules is yes and, which means you always have to go with what's happening in the scene, even if in your head you were going in another direction. Because if your partner comes and and you're doing a scene and suddenly they're like, oh my God, aliens are here. And you're like, no, they're not. Like the whole scene breaks down. So you have to, oh, yes. And now there are aliens that are on the scene. And that's the same thing with like it's the same principle. Like when you're an endurance athlete, it's like, ah,
Yeah.
yes. And now I've gone off course and I have to figure out how to get back on. Like it's just accepting it, because when you are able to do that, like embrace this idea of yes and, you'll reduce your reaction time to making the adjustment that needs to happen versus just like everything in us in that moment wants to fight against what's happening. But if it's something that's out of your control, all that fighting is just burning energy and taking time and keeping you from doing what you need to do to get through that moment successfully. So that's a big part, is just the acceptance of shit's going to go sideways, like, but you can handle it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I say that to my athletes quite often, especially my in-person athletes. Like we're on the track, we're running,
Yeah.
and it could be like an speed interval workout. And, there could be other teams on the track. So there's just, I mean, one week there were like 200 people on the track. It was absolute chaos. It was chaos. But every time they would stop and we would regroup before they headed into their next interval, I would talk to them about how important it was to be able to flow through that, because it's actually very similar to race
Yeah.
day. If you're running a major marathon or a major race, like in that sense of like you're going to be passing people for most of the race. So like let's get
Yeah.
used to it now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so flipping the script is such an important piece to it. I have to say, though, I am guilty as an athlete of not wanting to change. Like, I love, like, this is the loop I'm running. This is what I'm going to do. I kind of like have these really high expectations for myself. And then when things aren't jiving that way, and typically this doesn't happen in race day, it just happens in training. Well, I don't know, actually. Scratch that comment. I don't actually know that. What would you say to that athlete who maybe has these high expectations, or maybe they're unrealistic expectations going into workouts? How can that athlete kind of flow a little bit better? Is it that yes and, or is there another tool that they can use to help shift them in the moment?
Yeah, another one, and this is one like that. It helps if you've trained it a little bit to then flex that muscle in the moment that you need it. But like my first thought, with the like 200 people on the track, is like, this is great. Like this is such an opportunity and such a gift to be able to train with this. So one of the tools that I have is this worksheet called Obstacles to Opportunities, where like if you can see every situation, if it's not ideal, as an opportunity to train something that might happen on race day, your experience of it is different and your narrative of what's happening is very, very different. So the obstacles to opportunities, like when you work through the worksheet, what we're doing is playing with language. So we're playing with, when you're thinking about a situation that's in front of you and that you're maybe dreading a little bit, and the sentence you use to describe that situation is, this is going to suck. then you look at like, oh, okay, well, when I say this is going to suck, like what are the thoughts in my mind and what are the emotions that I feel? And then the next one you say is now same scenario, but we say this is going to be hard. Anything, and then go like, okay, when I think this is going to be hard, what are the thoughts in my mind? What are the emotions I feel? And you see like, does anything shift? And then you say this is going to be a challenge and do the same thing, and then say this is going to be an opportunity and do the same thing. And so what's helpful about that is like of working through this process first is like really seeing it as we're experimenting with language, because language matters. Like what we say has a corresponding emotional attachment to it, and emotions have such a significant impact on how we feel while we're performing, whether it's in training or competition. So
Hmm.
you can play with like the difference with language, because oftentimes we're not being intentional with the language we use. It's just coming out automatically of like, oh my God, this is going to suck. Right. So looking at that and looking at, does anything change when I go through that process and doing baby steps? Because if I come in and you're like really dreading something and I say, hey, what's the opportunity here? You're going to be like, screw you, Carrie. Like there is no opportunity. So you have to like work your way there to start flexing that resilience muscle. And then the more you do that, you kind of prime your brain for resilience and adaptation and problem solving, instead of staying sort of stagnant and stuck and wanting things to be rigid and only go the way that you had them in your mind.
Yeah, yeah. And that's so powerful. What would you recommend to that athlete who maybe goes to the exact same training loop or route to run all their tempos or all their long runs, or they run with the same group of people every single workout or long run, to kind of get them, break them out of that mold? Because
Yeah.
it is a sense of like, when you do that, although it's great and sometimes it's very easy, especially when we're busy, of just like, this is just what we do, it makes
Right.
training easier. It is a detriment to
Yeah.
some level of like, we're just protecting ourselves in this bubble.
Yes, yeah. And the brain likes novelty. So changing things up, especially in terms of like motivation for a long training cycle, um, or long training runs, like it helps you in terms of preventing burnout
Mhm.
by making sure the brain is still getting some novelty. So change, like deliberately changing things up every once in a while. And I get like sometimes you need to run that same route because it's like maybe it's the closest one to your house and you have a busy day and you're doing it right
Yeah.
after work or before work, and like that's what you need to do to get it done. And that's okay, right? That's where sometimes we think of just needing motivation, but you also need commitment. And those are two different things. So that's where it's like my commitment to my goal is the thing that gets me out and doing the same thing, even though maybe it would be nice to do something different. But if you can, like, make sure that within that training cycle, there are things that you're doing that are little that kind of trigger that novelty response, even if it means just running your regular route the opposite direction.
Yeah.
Sometimes that is enough to like your brain is seeing things in a different order, and that's novel to the brain.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. What would you say then for an athlete who, we talked earlier about this foundational stage of skill sets, and they're in the training cycle and they're working on, their process goals, their performance standards, and their mindset as they go through this training cycle. Is there a time in the training cycle where this mindset training should peak, very similar to how it peaks in a training cycle for volume and fatigue and fitness? Or should it just be a bit more even throughout the training cycle?
That's a great question. I would say sometimes it depends on the person and
Hmm.
what works best for them, like similar to physical training and like what's going to work best for your body, right? Like there's little things that you might be tweaking, but it can be like the idea of peaking in that like, um, maybe 3 to 4 weeks out from your race. Like
Hmm.
we've done the work, there's a solid foundation there. And now we might just be like addressing, like refining some things going into that into stay. So really you want the bulk of that done just like you're training, like ahead of time, right? So that you're
Yeah.
not introducing anything totally new and trying to wrap your head around like something new in that 3 to 4 weeks leading up to your race. So it's similar in that way. But really, like, the beautiful thing about mental training is, like, no matter how far out from your race you are, whether you're, 6 weeks out, 12 weeks out, or 1 day out, there's still something you can do to work on your mindset that's, within your control that could help you feel 1% more confident the next day.
Absolutely. So that was going to be my next question for an athlete who's maybe going into race week and they think, "Oh shoot,
Yep.
guess I missed this."
Huh. Yeah.
What advice do you give that athlete when they're, just a few days out from their A goal race?
Yes, yeah. Every once in a while, I will get an athlete that calls me, like, that I have not worked with before. That's like, I'm racing nationals this weekend and I'm freaking out, or I'm going to Worlds this weekend and I'm freaking out. Can we meet? And I'm like, Lord, okay. And so there are still things that you can do at that point where you're like, all right, we've got a week out or even a few days out. So there's a couple different things like when you only have that set amount of time that I'll suggest. So we don't want to introduce anything new, right? So you're always going to like, is there anything I've done in the past that have helped? So that's the first thing you want to ask. Like, is there anything I've done to prepare myself mentally or mindset wise for other races that worked really well for me? Because oftentimes there are things and you just got away from it. And so that might be the very first place to start. The other things that I might have an athlete do at that point is just like on a piece of paper, draw a line right down the middle of the piece of paper, and on the left side, title it in control, and the right side, title it out of control. And just brainstorm what are all of the things that are in your control when it comes to this race, and what are all of the things that are out of your control when it comes to this race. And really make sure, like, once you see those two columns, that you are camped out in the in control, because oftentimes we get hooked by things that are out of our control. So just like identifying like, oh, okay, there are things that are in my control and this is where my energy needs to be and not on that other side can be helpful. Another one I've done with athletes is that they can write just like absolutely everything that's on their mind to
Mm,
exhaustion, like about the race, about life, whatever, just like they're bulleting out, just like on a piece of paper, what is everything that is, on your mind right now that's keeping you from being in the present moment of like getting ready to race? And then once you're like, I think that I can't write it, I can't think of anything else, then you are, I like to use a paper shredder when I do it for my, because I do this myself. I like to put it through the paper shredder and shred it and know that like all that stuff's going to be waiting for me later. Some of that stuff I don't need to be worried about at all because that's not serving me. And then some of the other stuff, like I don't need to address that right now. I need to keep my focus right here in the moment. But you can like, if you don't have a paper shredder, you can like ball it up, throw it in the garbage, doesn't matter. But that's another helpful technique. And then sometimes the other one I'll have people, this one, like there's enough research on it and it's small enough that if they haven't done it, I feel okay with them experimenting with it. So this one is they can experiment with their self-talk and using second person versus first person. So some people already kind of do this organically, but so first person self-talk might be like, I'm ready for this. I've trained. I can do this. I trust my training. I trust my fitness. I'm ready to go. Versus second person, which would be like, Carrie, you have got this. You have done the training. You have done the work and there's no one else out here more ready than you, right? So you're using you and your name instead of using I. And
mm.
sometimes the way that we internalize that is very different. So it's called psychological distancing. So it works in particular really well if you're feeling stressed and like feeling nervous or like doubting yourself to coach. It's like you're your own coach in that moment.
Yeah, I love that tip so much. Highly, highly recommend anyone who is struggling with that positive self talk or that mantra to really try this out. I was participating in a running camp earlier this summer, and there were a lot of pro athletes there. And one of the resounding messages that came through, it was just so consistent from everyone, was their mantra and how they use that second person in their mantra.
Nice.
And
Yeah.
these are elite marathoners
Yeah.
who are going out and it's their job to race well. It's their job to be able to perform at a very high level. And so I really love that. And it's such a great tip and tool that we can take from the elites as well.
Absolutely.
Really quickly, for those athletes kind of morning of race, what's kind of like your number one tip for them as they wake up and they're maybe putting on their race kit and they start to feel the nerves or the excitement start to bubble in ways that we talked about earlier on
Yes.
at the beginning of this episode? What would be like your recommendation for them?
Yeah. So one of the things I like to do with my athletes is have them identify, ideally in this moment, how do I want to be feeling emotionally? And then what do I need to say to myself in order to feel that? Because oftentimes in the lead up, we're more focused on like the things we need to do to be ready for the race, but not necessarily ideally, how do I want to feel emotionally? And what do I need to, what's the self talk that I need to say in order to feel that? So even if you haven't done that work ahead of time, if it's more race morning and you're starting to feel nervous, to take a minute to breathe and self regulate and then say, okay, ideally, how do I want to feel in this morning? In my most ideal situation, how do I want to feel right now? And to kind of say that out like, oh, I want to feel prepared and calm, or I want to feel confident and excited, whatever it is. And then, okay,
Yeah.
so what do I need to say to myself in order to feel that? So that's one thing you might do. And then another thing is to, that I'll often encourage people to do too, is like to take a moment. There's two different ways to do this. Either take a moment where you just think about what you're feeling grateful for that morning. Um, or when you get to the race, like to kind of, yeah, as much as you can. This is like a little trickier, but like to separate yourself a little bit. You're still gonna have tons of people around, but like to just kind of like separate yourself a little bit and take that moment to breathe and take it all in and
Hmm.
go and just like have a moment of how amazing is it that I get to be here today and that I did everything I needed to do in my training, and give yourself that moment of like patting yourself on the back. And sometimes I'll have them literally pat themselves on the back to go, damn, I'm proud of myself for getting myself here. Like this is a huge goal. And I feel so good that I'm here today. So in, somehow kind of tapping into that feeling of like groundedness and gratitude is helpful too on race day.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that tip so much. I've used it before and it really does kind of bring things down a
Yes.
notch or two as you head into the corral or head into bib check or whatever you're
Yes.
doing. And it really, yeah, it can be very grounding, and that's a great place to be as you head into the start line. There any resources that you recommend or like your number one tip for a runner who is struggling with race day anxiety? What would you recommend to them?
Yeah, like if you're really dealing with this and like it's time to spend some time on your mental training. Like it's worth it. And you don't have to be an elite athlete. To like a lot of my clients are recreational age grouper. They're just people
Yeah.
who like this is I love I've set a big goal for myself. I'm excited to do this and I'm starting to worry of whether or not I can, or like your sport is meaningful to you. Like that it's worth it sometimes to meet with a mental skills coach or a sports psychologist to just get a little bit of help and tools that you can then carry forward and take with you forever. But like think about, there's so many great books out there on mental training, like that you can, grab a book and make it your goal in the off season to read a book about mindset training and see what do I want to incorporate in it. So it's worth the investment of time and money because it pays off in dividends. Like these are, I mean, really some of the skills that I work on with my athletes, they're also life skills, and they're going to continue to serve you in all of your races, in addition to your life, forever, as long as you keep doing them, right? Because you got to keep flexing the muscle. Like, unfortunately, right, you don't get to just do it once and be like, okay, cool, I'm good, I'm set for life. Like, you got to keep
Totally.
flexing the muscle. Yes.
Yes, you have to flex the muscle. And I mean, it's so true. Like running and life, it's all interchangeable and it can all help tenfold in all ways. And I think yeah, I think very similar to endurance training, right? It's the long game. We have to be patient. Studies have shown that like you don't typically run maybe effort marathon until 10 years into the sport. Like it takes years to develop the aerobic fitness to be able to do some pretty huge, big things. The same is probably true for mental strength training too. It's like you can very slowly chip away at it, and maybe there's some low hanging fruit that you can quickly grab at the beginning, but then continue to chip away at it because it's only going to help you in and out of your running shoes. Yeah. Well, thank you, Carrie. This was such a great convo. I really appreciate your time. For our audience who maybe is looking to follow you on social media or get a hold of you online and learn more about your services, where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can head to my website is carriejackson.com and there's all kinds of resources there. And then on social media, on Instagram, I'm at Feed the Athlete, which is like we all have a little monster on one shoulder and a little athlete on the other, and whichever one you feed is the one that gets stronger. So I'm at Feed the Athlete on Instagram and Mental Skills Training for Athletes on Facebook. If you're still on Facebook, you can find me there also.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. And thanks everyone for listening this week. I'll see you again next week.